A Father's Promise by Donnalynn Hess, Chapter 20. A Christmas Treasure. The liberal soul shall be made fat, and he that watereth shall be watered also himself. How about walking now? Suggested Rudy, as soon as they reached the edge of the woods. Ingrid was willing, so Rudy set her down and took her by the hand. We have to stay deep in the forest during the daylight, he said as he led her along. It isn't safe otherwise. You see, the Germans send their soldiers out here nearly every day to look for people like us. Oscar told me that. Oscar's a friend of mine, the man my father had me meet the first day I got out of Warsaw. Rudy had not had anyone to talk to for several days, and he was thoroughly enjoying himself, yet though he was having to do all the talking. It's been getting worse for the villagers, too, he continued. I heard that the Nazis have been visiting the farmers the last few days and threatening them. Boy, that would really make Oscar mad if he were here. You see, Oscar and I have this friend in one of the villages. Her name's Anna. She said I could stay with her if I wanted to, but I decided to stay out here instead. And now, with things getting more dangerous, I'm even afraid to go and visit her. She has this nephew. Rudy stopped, for at that moment he looked down at Ingrid. Her expression suddenly made him realize that his conversation was not very comforting to her. You don't have to worry, though, he added, trying to sound more encouraging. I can take care of you. She didn't look as if she had been convinced. He tried again. Really, Ingrid, everything will be fine. Oscar taught me not only how to live out here, but also how to outsmart the Germans. She began to look somewhat relieved. And maybe a little later, it'll be all right to go to see Anna, he added cheerfully. You'd like Anna. She's good at outsmarting Germans, too. When at last Ingrid seemed satisfied, Rudy determined that it might be best for him to keep quiet for a while. They had traveled in silence for more than an hour when Ingrid suddenly let go of Rudy's hand and sat down in a nearby stump. Come on, Ingrid, he urged. We haven't gone far enough yet. But instead of getting up again, she drew her legs up close to her body, tucked her rabbit securely in her lap, and put her head down on her knees. Her reaction irritated Rudy until he noticed that her bare legs were scratched and bleeding, and the shoes she had on were so worn that they scarcely protected her feet from the winter cold. Until that moment, he had not given the slightest thought to how ill prepared she was for such travel. Why didn't you tell me you were getting all scratched up? Said Rudy, sitting down beside her. But he had no sooner gotten the question out of his mouth than he realized how stupid it sounded. By sitting down, she was trying to tell him. We still have a way to go, but I can carry you on my back, he suggested. She turned her face toward him. You won't get too heavy that way, he said. After a moment more, she stood up, clutching her rabbit firmly by the ear. She waited for Rudy to hoist her up. As they continued, Rudy stopped to check several traps he had set along the way. There were 7 in all, and they were just coming up on the third. We've got one, said Rudy, as he let Ingrid slide down off his back onto the ground. Releasing the animal from the trap, he held it up proudly. Look, he said, expecting to at least a smile from her. But Ingrid was not impressed. Obviously, she preferred living, or at least stuffed rabbits, to dead ones. Now I know what Oscar must have felt like the night he wanted me to compliment him for exploding all those trucks, Rudy said to himself as he let the hand which held the rabbit drop to his side. I wouldn't have killed it if we didn't need it, he said, but we have to eat, and this will taste really good. A lot better than what we've been eating, I bet. You'll see. He set the rabbit on the ground and knelt down to let Ingrid get on his back again. Once he had gotten her comfortably settled, he picked up his game and moved on. If I can catch another one of these, he said, looking down at her worn shoes, I'll make you a Christmas present. As he, as he had hoped, another trap yielded him a second rabbit. It was noon before Rudy was satisfied with, with their location. He set Ingrid down and immediately cleared a space about 6 feet in circumference. That tree will be good for helping us build a fire that'll keep us warm right through the night, he said, pointing to a dead tree that had fallen close to the edge of the clearing. That can be our main burning log. Now what we need are some twigs to start it up and some kindling to keep it going. Why don't you collect the twigs? Just make sure they're dry. Like this one, he said, showing her. Well, while you're doing that, I can get the heavier sticks we'll need to keep the fire fed. Ingrid was delighted to help and very proud of herself when she turned to Rudy with a small fistful of matted, wet leaves mixed up with a few twigs. Oh, that's great, he said. Maybe you could find a few more. She dropped what she had at his feet. While she was off looking for more, Rudy quickly set out to replace what she had brought him, and by the time she returned with her second handful, he had all the dry twigs he needed. Thanks, Ingrid. I think we're just about ready, he said, taking out his knife. All I need to do now is just break this thick stick up a bit by carving small notches opposite each end every so often, like this, he said, showing her as he did so. I can break them over my knee real easy. Rudy soon had the fire ablaze and Ingrid seated comfortably on the log beside it. He then set out to pitch a lean-to to shelter them for the night. Most of the time he was able to get one up in less than an hour, for he always saved his lashings, and there were all usually several thick branches laying about the forest floor. All he had to do was collect 8 or 10 of them, tie them together, prop them up, and cover them with pine branches. To keep them even warmer, he built the shelter with the open side toward the fire. He also lashed several shorter branches together to form a small barrier. This he placed on the other side of the fire to reflect the heat into the lean-to. As he worked, he also watched Ingrid, remembering how fascinated he had been the first time he watched Oscar set up for the night. He said, if you stick with me, I'll teach you a lot of new things. His comment pleased her. Once the lean-to was finished, he skinned and cleaned up the rabbits they had caught. Then, after cutting the meat into small strips and laying it on the stone grill, he turned to Ingrid. You stay here and watch the meat. I'm going right over there a way to start a smaller fire for something else. I'll be back before the meat's done. After their morning travel, she was more than content to sit and enjoy the warmth of the fire and watch the meat sizzle on the grill. Rudy made his way just out past the clearing. He was still close enough, however, to keep an eye on Ingrid. He built a small fire, making sure the flames were low, for this one was not for warmth. Once he had gotten it started, he crisscrossed several logs to surround it. Then he collected some damp leaves and placed them in the spaces between the logs. After a few minutes, when the leaves were warm and dry, he put them carefully in his pocket. Next, he set up 8 tall sticks about the fire and draped the rabbit skins over the sticks to dry out. Looks like it's almost time to eat, he said, returning to Ingrid and turning the meat over on the grill. But while we're waiting for that to finish, I want to show you something that will help keep your feet from getting cold even when we don't have a fire going. Removing the leaves from his pocket, and he knelt down beside her and took her shoes off and socks off. He then wrapped leaves around her feet and put her socks back on. These leaves will keep your feet insulated, warm. She looked down and tried wiggling her toes. She then began to frown, and Rudy started worrying. It really helps, Ingrid, he said. Look, I put leaves in my boots too." Once he had shown her the leaves in his own socks, she held her feet up for him to keep her shoes to put her shoes back on. He had won. As Rudy dished up Ingrid's dinner, he was careful to give her all the warnings Oscar had given him his first day in the forest. He soon discovered, however, that she did not need to be told to eat slowly or lightly. Food did not seem to interest her as it did him. By the time he had finished his third helping, she was still dawdling with her first. "I'm going over to check out the other fire," he said, "and I want you to finish that by the way, by the time I get back. I didn't give you very much, but it's really important that you eat. It helps you keep warm in this cold and keeps you from getting sick. I wouldn't know what to do if you got sick, you know." But the warning seemed to have little effect until he added, "I'll give you your Christmas present as soon as you're done." When he got up to leave, she was eating. The rabbit skins were not dry yet. He returned to the lean-to and worked on it some more, tidied the camp, and sat by the fire while Ingrid picked at her food. He checked on the skins again. They were almost ready. Since he still had some time, Rudy sat down and picked up a rough stone to sharpen his knife while he waited. After about 15 minutes more, he removed the skins from the props and worked them hard over a fallen branch, as though he were buffing a shoe or boot with them. Then, taking his knife, he cut each skin into a large square, and putting the fire out, he returned to Ingrid. "Come on over here," he said to Ingrid as he laid one of the 4 square flat on the ground. "Now take off your shoes and put your feet right in the middle of that square." As she did so, Rudy folded the rabbit skin over her toes and gathered it up around the sides and heel of her foot. Then he tied it around her ankle with one of his extra lashings. To his surprise, she had her other shoe off before he could even get the second piece of fur laid out. "Now you have some soft, warm shoes just like mine," he said as he tied on her other boot. "As soon as I can catch another rabbit," he added, "I'll make you a pair of mittens to match." When Rudy finally looked up at Ingrid, the smile on her face reminded him of the Christmases that he had known before. Her happiness did much to help lighten the darkness of the winter forest and to take away the sadness of that Christmas day.